Welcome, I'm Ben. I run special projects at ZoomInfo, and I'm excited to be here. First of all, very excited by this conference. The team at HubSpot did an amazing job, so shout out to a few of the HubSpot people who are in the audience. And so what we're going to talk about today is how you can think about using ZoomInfo and data that comes from our competitors or third-party data of all types to actually think of it as a platform that you can build a go-to-market strategy on top of. And so there's a few sort of foundational things about building a go-to-market playbook that we'll get into. But the first thing I want to do is actually define how we think about playbooks. Like, what is a play? A play I would think of as a sort of discrete end-to-end motion that helps you have a unique set of inputs, targeting criteria, workflow, and leads to an engagement with a customer across one or more channels. So I want to sort of set that as the context here, because a lot of what we'll talk about are the foundational data layer that you can build out, and then how you can build company-specific plays. So plays that are just for your customers, your persona, your ICP, and build that on top of your data layer. So one of the problems that we hear people say is that their best plays are often trapped inside the heads of their best reps. So if a rep has unlimited time and perfect data, they can generally figure out something really awesome to do with that data to generate an insight, something that they're sort of combining multiple pieces of data to create something new and to help create a great experience for their customers. But often these don't scale. If you ask the customer to do it for 10 companies, it takes all day. And if you ask them to do it for 1,000, they basically stop, right? And so go back to sort of doing things one by one. And there's a few challenges within that. The first is a major efficiency gap that we see for most B2B companies. So if you sort of look at this sort of top level slide, the way that most companies think about growing revenue is to just add more heads and increase the number of salespeople and the amount of quota that they have to go and achieve that. And meanwhile, almost 30% of a sales rep's time is actually just spent looking for data, literally figuring out who can I go after? What do I know about them? Which people exist there? What technologies do they use? What signals are out there? And figuring out how to leverage that data. So often you'll see someone invest, a huge amount in CRM, but not necessarily have a lot of the raw materials inside the CRM to make it work. I was actually talking to a company recently. It's a very large SaaS company that does not use HubSpot. They use a different CRM. And they told us they spend $100 million on salespeople, $100 million a year on salespeople. They spend $10 million with this other CRM provider, and they spend $80,000 on data. And when we asked them why there's such an imbalance there, they said that they thought of it as a core part of the sales rep's job to go and find that data and execute against it. The simple fact is that the world has just changed a lot. And now this explosion of raw data makes it so you don't have to have your sales reps going out and doing this one by one. The second problem that we see is that we're often leaving the entire end-to-end playbook flow in the hands of folks who are sort of like 2 to 10 years out of school. And they're responsible for thinking about large-scale targeting. Who are we going after? What do I know about them? How do I think about my playbook backlog of what's out there and what plays can I run? How do I set up all the infrastructure to feed those plays with data? How do I plug in the salespeople, and how do I measure it and iterate? And the simple fact is that salespeople are really good at some of this and not good at other parts of this at all. And so what we often see is ops can create a huge amount of leverage if you can help sort of create a new lane to allow sales and marketing people to stand on the shoulders of this centralized work. So thinking about this lane as sort of the clearinghouse for raw data and bringing that data in, normalizing it, cleaning it, staging it, and putting it in the hands of salespeople in an actionable way instead of asking them to go out and find all of this data. The third problem is that there's just a huge amount of decay and waste in the data industry. So Forrester says that more than 60% of data that's generated at a company simply falls on the floor and people don't actually do anything with it at all. And the world changes all the time, right? So a lot of data is out of date within 1 year of someone actioning it or getting their hands on it for the first time, right? So people leave jobs, companies get acquired, the teams grow, people change roles internally and externally, and then there's new companies created all the time that are constantly raising money, constantly pivoting, possibly changing industries, and the world simply changes around the plan that you've already built. And the big part of that is that there's just a huge amount of fragmentation in the industry, right? So a lot of these new companies that are popping up have made it so people sort of have this Frankenstack sort of approach where they have a huge number of different vendors that they're trying to make work together. And we think that that sort of was a trend for a long time, and there's going to be a set of consolidation around this. And ZoomInfo has been a help to drive some of that by acquiring a lot of these companies to really build out a full-featured sales stack. So first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about what does it take to create this foundational data layer that allows you to build the playbook on top of it. And so this is a bit of a high wire act because I'm actually going to use HubSpot as the example for a lot of these plays. If there's HubSpot people in the audience, I'm sort of taking some liberties as just an example, so it's grounded in a customer that everybody knows, but these are not actually necessarily things that HubSpot's doing today. But what I want to do is first talk about what does this foundational data layer look like, and how do you think about building that so that you can go and build the playbook on top of it. So a lot of us are probably familiar with a lot of the core attribute data. What's the company's name? What's the domain? What's the industry? Where are they? How many employees, right? These are a lot of the core things that we see sales and marketing professionals base their targeting criteria and their playbook on. And what we found is that the best companies are thinking about that as only a starting point. They're taking that foundational data layer and they're using it to do processing and computation to actually generate what we would think of as like computed traits or custom attributes, things that maybe ZoomInfo won't even sell you, but might be so specific to your company that it will actually sort of create these market-making plays and allow you to talk to customers in a sort of row-by-row, very relevant way and do it at scale. So as I think about these custom attributes, one of the examples that I always like to give is that if you talk to the best sales rep at Stripe, what they'll tell you is they're often going and looking for where regional traffic is coming from as a proxy for which markets the company is serving. And then they may go and look at what languages they're serving content in as a proxy for what payment types and what regions they're already serving. Then they do the gymnastics in their head to figure out, okay, where is there a market opportunity that we're not capturing? That's a perfect example of an attribute that only Stripe and maybe its competitors would care about, but that's really, really helpful for thinking about targeting, segmentation, content pivots, and helping to unlock entire new plays on the top of that. So let's go a little bit deeper into some of this, right? So a lot of people think of a lot of these core attributes that you see on the left here as sort of the standard things that you might know about a company. But there's often sort of hidden attributes that create insights about a company that are sitting right in front of us, but we're not necessarily actioning. So an example of that is what I would think of as persona density. So persona density is the concept of looking at what is the makeup of the team and what type of folks work at this company as a proxy for fit, right? And that does two things. The first thing that it does is it tells us, is this the right type of company for us to talk to, right? Do they have a heavy focus on ops and data science, or do they try to solve their problems by hiring more and more sales and marketing people? But the other thing it does is it simply allows us to know which companies can we talk to, right? Where are there people who are our target persona that we can reach out to? And what we find is often people think about this targeting criteria without that in mind and say, here's the 10,000 accounts we care about for this year. Oh, by the way, we can't talk to 60% of them. That is a problem that we see every single day. So looking at persona density as a proxy for fit can be a very powerful concept and works horizontally across companies. And then we look at people data, right? So again, you think of all the classic things like someone's first name, their title, their email address, their phone number, et cetera. But there's all of these computed traits that you can create on top of that. What's the last piece of content they looked at? What's the engagement score? How does that roll up to a lead score? How do you think about a row-by-row difference between one prospect versus the other and how that informs the way you'll treat them? And so often these computed traits are really where all the magic happens in unlocking these new plays, and we'll talk about that in some of the examples. Tech data is another core piece of this foundational data layer. So a lot of people will go and think about tech data as sort of a rote targeting criteria. Show me companies who use HubSpot, and I'll target them based on that. Or show me companies who have a marketing automation technology of some sort. Where it really gets interesting is when you can do the processing and the computed traits on top of these attributes and create real insights, right? So maybe you know what they use for outbound or you know what they use for ads, but have you done the roll-up to say, what type of tech does this company buy? Are they buying tech that comes from Y Combinator and a lot of the sort of up-and-coming startups in San Francisco or New York, or they tend to have a more old-school stack? that can be a better proxy for how you might want to treat them and talk to them than just looking at like, you have this technology. I would think of that as the difference between sort of an observation of like, hey, I notice you use this tech, I want to sell you my product, and an insight where you're sort of taking more than one piece of information to create something new and build something on top of that. And so the last category of data is really around signals. And I would think of this as sort of temporal data versus static data. A lot of the data that we just talked about across company data, people data, and tech data generally doesn't change that often, right? So tech data does when people install and uninstall new tools. But there's a huge world of data out there that changes all the time. Like, what projects are they working on? What content are they looking at on the web? What companies have they acquired or merged with? Who have they recently hired or lost to a different company? Right? There's a huge number of what we would think of as sort of like intent and news signals that can actually tell you not just what to talk to them about, but when to reach out, right? So if you know that someone's just acquired a company and hired a new CFO, what does that actually tell you about what's going on in the business? And how do you get to the second order effects of how that would inform your playbook? And so, there's a huge amount of work that can be done to process this as well by mapping intent signals to your personas, by mapping your technographics to your intent signals to figure out, when they've just hired this new person who's a director of marketing, what technology will they end up using? So again, combining multiple pieces of data to create a true insight. And this is a lot of the work that the best rep or the best marketing people would do anyway. But the idea is to create this centralized lane that allows you to sort of create a foundational layer to unlock these plays at scale and serve them up for your team. So let's talk about that. What we'll do is we'll sort of use HubSpot again as just the example of how you can weave data like this into your playbook and how do we think about these end-to-end plays that help create new revenue opportunities. And so it's really about, often leveraging this huge amount of data that you're already creating. So a lot of the folks who are in the room today and use HubSpot are already generating a huge amount of content of what ads do they click on, what content are they looking at, what are they doing on my site. And often we action that from the marketing perspective, but don't incorporate that into sort of a broader enhanced ICP or enhanced enrichment to help build go-to-market plays that scale across channels. So let's go through a few examples and talk about how this all comes together. The first example that we'll go through is thinking about targeting X customers, right? So many of you in the audience probably have customers who loved your product, they wanted to continue using it, but they simply changed jobs, right? They left and went to a different company. For a lot of these PLG-focused companies, right, like your HubSpot, Airtable, a lot of companies have huge number of customers who are super loyal, and if they go to their next place, all you have to do is tap them on the shoulder and remind them that they love your product. But most companies fail to actually industrialize this motion and make it repeatable for the team. And so, an example of this is setting up a workflow rule that says, here's a set of 10,000 people that I want to track. And when they change companies, qualify them for a specific play where we can talk about their new company, their transition, their new role. Again, the best reps are already doing this. The idea is in this ops focus lane is to create that leverage for the team and serve these up. And then once you know that, you can build a whole bunch of rules and workflow around it to say, when this happens, go and source the entire buying committee at the new place and talk to them about this person joining. Serve this company ads that now knows you have a champion who's just landed at this company, but maybe they're not already qualifying for your paid or your programmatic spend. Send them content that pivots on a lot of the foundational data that you know about their last company, right? So you know what they used in their tech stack, you know what the company cared about and the makeup of the last company's team. Use that to inform your content at the next place. When they come back to the site or someone from that company comes to the site, how do we think about changing the chat content to tell them something different with all of this foundational data in mind? And then you can even weave this into your sales motion. So a lot of people think of sort of top of funnel as very data-driven, very scalable, and bottom of funnel as very human-driven. A lot of that's changing, right? So we acquired a company last year called Chorus, and Chorus does conversation intelligence, where they're able to record and transcribe the content of a sales call and actually tell you what happened. It allows for things like search or indexing, specific keywords being mentioned, but it also allows you to kick off workflows. So if you're having someone who's landed at a new company and they mention a competitive product, shouldn't that go off to your compete team? Shouldn't that create a workflow that maybe qualifies them for a compete sales flow or a compete sequence? So again, weaving in this data throughout the entire life cycle of your playbook. A second really common play that we recommend to every company is to think about how to make more of the companies that are coming to your pricing page. So most of us have a website that generates, some amount of traffic, right? And HubSpot gets a huge number of hits to their site, right? SimilarWeb says something like 42 million a year. Most companies fail to take this information and look into the past to say, show me everyone who's ever come to my site and make sure that I'm revisiting those folks really often, right? So if, let's say something like 8% of the people that come to your site end up visiting your pricing page, you want to approach them with your playbook with that in mind, that they had real intent, but maybe didn't convert to become a customer. So if you don't have a motion around leveraging the data coming off of your pricing page, it's simply leaving money on the floor. And so, there's all this rich data even within the pricing page, right? What did they click on? What did they look at? How long did they stay there for? Who else from the company looked at this pricing page? What's sort of the density of the activity on this pricing page? And then again, there's just so many different things that you can weave in, like maybe what products they were looking at as they were looking on the pricing page. So this can be as simple as just setting up a rule to say when someone hits this page, go out and source the buying committee from that company and qualify them for this scalable play. And stop me if you've heard this before, but setting up a workflow to serve ads to them, to customize your outbound content, to customize the chatbot when they come to the site, and to customize the playbook for when you actually engage with that customer, knowing that they visited your pricing page. A third play that I think a lot of companies who have a huge amount of product usage, but maybe are having trouble with growth, need to leverage is to think about how do you use product utilization data as a proxy for upsell and fit and what to talk to them about. So most of our companies, and for example, HubSpot has a number of different product areas, and they likely invest in a huge amount of analytics to know who's using which products, which features are they using in which product, and how can you map that activity to say you've done X and Y in Marketing Hub. That tends to tell us that you'd be a good candidate for Sales Hub. So often, again, going back to this idea of creating an insight, you could look at the way that they're using your product and maybe look at, do they have a lot of enablement people? What's the type of technology they're using? What's the type of intent content that they're taking in? And create an insight that says, okay, I can better understand maybe their sales motion and how I talk to this company based on what I'm seeing in both their product usage, but weaving in all this other foundational data as well. So again, create a workflow, serve ads, inform your outbound content, inform your chatbot, inform your sales playbook when you engage with the customer. The last one that we'll talk about is personas and tech broadly, and how do you think about building plays on top of these very, very straightforward and very common set of attributes. So an example that I see not enough companies action on is companies like ZoomInfo have a lot of information on technographics of who is using your competitors, who's using companies that you integrate with, who's using adjacent technology. So that can be, again, a very rote targeting criteria to say, let's go after companies who are using our competitors. Great, you should do that. But you can actually build things on top of it that really get to true understanding, like what a human would do if they had a lot of time and a lot of processing power. Like, are they using modern tech, right? What are the top pieces of tech that they're integrating with? And so this is just looking at HubSpot's public data, like they have all of these integrations, over 1,000 partners in the store, understanding how many of those companies are out there, how many of the companies are using more than one of these technologies, can be a very, very powerful mechanism to say something really specific. The other thing that we talked about in the foundational data layer is just looking at persona density. Again, this is something that every single company should do, is look at the account level, what is the makeup of the team, and how does that inform the way that we talk to them? Setting up a workflow, serving them ads based on that, informing your outbound, informing your chatbot content. So a lot of this are things that the data is just sitting there today and can be weaved in. It's about taking a step back, creating this lane to actually action all this data and weave it into all of your go-to-market plays. So for the folks in the audience here and the folks who are streaming online, what can you do today? One of the first recommendations that we have for any company is just to simply think about playbook expansion, right? Most companies are running something like 5 to 10 core sales and marketing plays. And we feel at ZoomInfo that there's probably something like 100 or maybe 200 horizontally applicable plays that every company can run. It may require, new types of data, new types of processing, but the first thing is getting into the details of what plays can we run today? What does the attribute backlog look like to help us unlock new plays? And what are all the details about these plays? Are they warm versus cold? Are they easy or are they hard? What stage of the funnel are they? What's the lift for the SDR or the sales team? And what's the impact? If you really get into all the metadata and start to break down the details of your playbook, it can give you a lot of clarity about what plays are out there that you're not already running. Idea 2 is really creating this lane, right? So what we see again is a lot of times people think about investing in ops as a way to support sales. I would think of it the exact opposite way. Investing in ops, a lot of people think about investing in sales and then hiring ops people to support them. I would think about the inverse of investing in ops and allowing the sales and marketing team to stand on the shoulders of this centralized work and centralized data to give them leverage. So they're never thinking about what accounts are we going after? What do we know about them? How have they interacted with our content? Where did they work before? But instead having insights served up and knowing exactly what to do with them. And the third area is to really think creatively about your data strategy. The average company that we talk to relies on 4 attributes to power a lot of their top-level targeting of who are the companies that are in our ICP. I would argue that most companies should be incorporating something like 20 or 30 attributes, and many of them are going to be so specific to your company that nobody will sell them to you, but they're really worth the heavy lift to go out there and source them and to build these custom plays on top, right? So what ads is the company serving? What did they mention in their most recent earnings call? What's their pricing model? What's their sales model? Again, these are really hard attributes to go and get, but if you can source them centrally and stage them up for your sales team, they can build amazing things on top of that work. So one sort of announcement for later this fall, we're actually going to be open sourcing a lot of our playbook, and we're excited to share a lot of these plays with the entire community. So what you'll see is we're actually going to build a lot of these plays into our product so that you can take these plays off the shelf, save them, and run them at your company, where you go in and you say, oh, I want to run the pricing page play. You press go, and there's a workflow that comes out of the box to do everything from figuring out who your targeting criteria, who the audience is, what's the workflow, where do we want to engage with these customers. Really appreciate everyone's time. I hope everyone has a great conference, and thank you so much.